Hi everyone, welcome to the session. There are people who are still joining us, so we'll just start in a couple of minutes. Hi everyone, welcome to the session. We'll be starting shortly. There are still people joining. Okay, so we can begin. Thank you all so much for joining our much awaited session on the topic Extracting Solid Wealth from Waste the Startup Way. This session is organized by Blume Ventures as part of Climate Startup Week April 2024 edition. We are excited to have our speakers who are experienced and insightful about solid waste management sector's current aspects and are important stakeholders in its progress and innovation. We hope you all find this session valuable. I will now hand it over to Mudit Narayan, who's the Vice President of Blume Ventures, and who will now moderate this session. Over to you, Mudit.
Thank you, Akshay. Always a pleasure to collaborate with Climate Collective. To start off, talking a little bit about Blume Ventures. Blume is a homegrown Indian VC of about 13 years of age with four funds, almost actually more than $600 million under management across a variety of sectors, but a special focus on climate tech and energy and sustainability. We have large portfolio companies in electric vehicles, solar installations, and so on. And we are going deeper in several sectors, including batteries, including green hydrogen, and recycling of various kinds. Today's session on solid waste management, and what role startups can play in it is, we think, a very big part of the climate puzzle, the climate challenge, the energy transition that is in front of us. Because solid waste represents not just a lot of material that is being used just once or twice, but is also laying a huge burden on urban waste disposal systems, on large landfills, and the resources base of the world as a whole. We believe that solid waste provides an important route to circularity, and that circularity still requires a lot of technological innovation, a lot of process innovation, a lot of improved management, especially in a country like India. Just to articulate the magnitude of the challenge, all of us have seen. We all generate solid waste in our lives, municipal waste, but we also see it on our streets. We see a fair amount of garbage, even in the mountains sometimes. I was in the mountains recently, and it was very unfortunate to see lots of the slopes having plastic or glass bottles and then various kinds of waste. We see landfills, especially in Delhi. It's very difficult to come in from any of the suburban towns and not cross at least one landfill. 60 to 65 million tons of waste being generated in the country every year. That number is only expected to increase. We are still a little far from 100% collection, which is why you see a lot of garbage on our streets and on our fields. But it's really the recycling where we are really falling short. Estimates say that we, as a country, recycle barely 20% of material, and some countries go as high as 60 to 80%. But we really should be aspiring to go to what you would call near zero in waste generation. So these are some challenges, these challenges that you see in statistics, but also see in your daily lives. I'm very proud to say that today we have a very interesting panel, and especially a panel that comes from very diverse sectors. Startups are not known to have engaged in this sector very much, but we do have people who have started off in this sector. Let me start off by introducing Rishabh Shah, who's actually a computer science enthusiast, studied at the Vellore Institute of Technology, and started off studying AI and robotics, but has really focused on applications of AI in the waste management sector. He set up a company called Wasteful Insights, which is at the forefront of revolutionizing waste management through cutting edge AI technology. Their solution automates waste sorting units and helps them integrate into existing waste management facilities, enhancing the efficiency and precision of the processes. He'll tell you more about his technology, but they've done a variety of machines which can identify a large number of different waste streams. We have also Mr. Arun, who's the Vice President of Sales at Sahas Zero Waste. He started his career in the waste management industry in the UK, working on automated material recovery facility projects. Arun has core competencies in leveraging mechanization and automation to recover resources from waste. He started a venture for recycling of thermocol waste in Bangalore. But more recently, he's had a very big role to play in evolving the material resource facility and EPR verticals at Sahas Zero Waste. EPR has proven instrumental in recovery of plastic packaging waste and diversion from landfills, and he has implemented various projects in this sector. And we'll talk a lot more about MRFs. And I know that my friend Viral here has been thinking about the waste cycle, the value chain for several months now, and he's been looking deeply at the material recovery facility as a point of intervention. Viral comes from a very distinguished record in the startup industry. He's a venture builder and an entrepreneur, and has had very important stints in companies like Runner and Smart Staff. And he'll be sharing his insights of what he's been talking to about from various sectors in the last few months. So with that introduction, let me invite Mr. Arun to lay out his perspective. He's been in this sector for perhaps the longest amongst those on the panel today. His experiences, sorry, your experiences, Arun, and how you think India's waste management is either improving or needs improvement in the near future. Thank you.
Thanks, Mudit. Good afternoon, everyone. Happy to be here and address a fantastic group of people, especially when the waste management system in India needs more and more people to come into the space. I've seen this space for at least a decade now very closely, especially in Bangalore and a few other parts of southern India as well. I actually started off in this domain as a small startup looking at thermocol recycling. That was 10 years back, 10 to 11 years back. And since then, I've shifted into a full-time role at Sahas Zero Waste, where we've seen quite a lot of traction that has come up over the past 10 years or so. In terms of the key indicators and the motivators, so to speak, of waste management in India, we've seen a lot of technologies come and go. We've seen a lot of new solutions come and go. But what's always remained is the fundamentals of waste management. And when I say fundamentals of waste management, Bangalore is proud about a decentralized solution that has been adopted for many years now. And it all starts from the households in terms of segregating your waste, segregating the dry and the wet and the domestic hazardous waste separately. It all starts from there. And then from there, the entire supply chain is extremely complex. The way the ecosystem has evolved, let's say maybe 5 to 6 years back, plastic waste was sorted into maybe 10, 15 categories. Today, plastics can be sorted into as many as 80 categories. And this is what we do at our facilities to be able to add more value to the waste. So this is how complex plastic waste can be. And plastics is one of the 30 categories that gets sorted at a materials recovery facility. And this is only possible because you have to segregate the waste at source. Once you mix it, you can't fix it. And from another perspective, from a policy perspective, we've seen a lot of traction in solid waste management rules coming about. Plastic waste management rules in India are very strong. And it's one of the very unique situations where across the globe, we've seen plastic waste management rules, but India is subject to a lot of amendments and improvements in the policy very rapidly. I would say over the past 6 years or so, we've seen multiple number of amendments, all for the right reasons. We also have policies from different other types of waste streams as well, e-waste, etc. And the concept of EPR as well has started coming up quite well. If any of you visit the CPCB portal online, you'll be able to see a lot of information is available in public, where not only the producers of plastic packaging waste, but also the recyclers are listed out. And we have very good levels of technology interventions as well. So just to summarize, while we've had a slow start since the 2016 solid waste management rules, it has started picking up pace over the past 5 years, I would say. A lot of technology interventions, a lot of solutions in the supply chain. But as Mudit explained, we still are very, very short and lacking with the infrastructure for recycling. So that's one piece which has to be fixed very quickly. But that's a quick overview, and would like to deep dive into any other aspects as well.
Thank you, Arun. I think after the first comments, I'll come back to you on the entire EPR and plastic rules story. Maybe there's a lot more that we can unpack there. Let me now come to Rishabh. Rishabh, you've come quite a distance from computer science to waste management. If you want to share your journey and your experiences before I bring it to Viral to tie it all together.
Sure. It has been a long journey, and it has been a different experience altogether, because computer science was all about learning technology, but it's the application that matters end of the day, and that has been the focus from the day one. And since then itself, when I had been working, and post that also when I started working on Wasteful Insights, the vision has always been to put technology into an application where it can affect on day-to-day basis on everyone's lives. And when that was when I had moved into the wastelands, and I had gone into the landfills, I had understood that there is a requirement for a solution which is scalable and can grow at a pace with the Indian ecosystem. And that is when we started designing the whole vision based AI software and identifying different materials, and then on top of it we designed our own robotic and automation pipeline, which automatically sorts every category of waste that is coming in. So I mean, that has been the idea since beginning, that making it as efficient as possible and optimized for the Indian waste management ecosystem.
Thank you. I'll come back to you on your experiences in the sector as you deployed technology. And now let me come to Viral. Viral, you've recently jumped into the sector, and you've been talking to so many people. Share with us what you've learned in the sector, what the challenges are, but more specifically as a veteran entrepreneur, as somebody who's taken companies from a piece of paper to large enterprises. Why do you think the startup way of thinking is one of the ways to address the startup, because the waste challenge?
So I've been now closely looking at the waste management space for the last three and a half months. And the journey has been very eye-opening, right? In the sense that just in terms of sheer numbers, right? India produces, like you said, 65 million tons of waste every year. And while scientifically everything can be recycled, a very small portion of it ends up getting recycled and coming back to the circular economy, right? And that seems like a very large opportunity. I do believe that fundamentally, someday we will get to being a fully circular economy. It's just a matter of time and how long that transition is going to take, right? And I do believe that within that journey of the world and our country transitioning to a fully circular economy, there are multiple problems that entrepreneurs can pick up, right? To fix the supply chain and to ensure full circularity. So yeah, from that perspective, it's an incredibly exciting space, and I'm still sort of building my thesis on what the first right problem statement is. But I'm excited to sort of be at the forefront of this transition of the country and of the world from the economy that it is today to being a completely circular economy.
And you believe that technology has a role to play, especially in bringing the efficiency role. And if you want to maybe talk about that a little bit.
Very, very much so, right? Like every other industry, right? Technology has disrupted multiple industries in the past, and I've had the good fortune of being a part of incredible teams that have used technology and disrupted different industries and different business models. And I do believe that the same is going to happen with waste management.
Thanks. To the audience, we already had one question and which was answered by Arun. But please bring your questions online. You have a window available. Please type them out. We'll take them after a couple of rounds. Arun, let me come back to you on the entire EPR plastic story. The audience here would be a mix of enthusiasts who are into this sector, but also people from the climate sector broadly. So if you want to maybe share a little bit on what the journey has been, what the objectives have been, even the drawbacks and the shortcomings, so that we have a holistic picture. Thank you.
Yes, EPR has actually come in quite earlier on. This was 6 years back, as compared to most other parts of the globe. And when it came about in India, there was very little traction for at least a year or so, where probably some of the top brands were inclined to participating in EPR, even if it was a compliance issue for them. And there were quite a few, anomalies, so to speak, in the policy itself. I'll give you a typical example. Something that's spoken about at large these days is multi-layered plastics. Now, when the policy came out initially with multi-layered plastics, there was a clause where the brands were supposed to stop producing multi-layered packaging within a period of, if I'm not wrong, 2 years. And the way this was defined is multi-layer plastic is something that cannot be recovered. But unfortunately, later on, it got turned around saying that, yes, multi-layered plastics can be consumed as alternate fuel because it has a high calorific value in cement factories. So it's used as an alternate to fossil fuels. So that continued going forward. But then there were a few more, loopholes, so to speak, where multi-layered plastics are now, so all plastics are categorized into three grades, category 1, 2, 3, rigid plastics, flexibles, and multi-layer, and then there's a category 4 as well. But then a lot of the multi-layer plastic got shifted from category 3, which means it's got a metallic layer, and then it's moved into category 2, which unfortunately does not help with the current scenarios because MLPs, as they call it, are not recyclable. So these are some technicalities around EPR. Maybe I won't deep dive into the technicalities, but at a larger picture, I would say EPR has contributed positively. I would say at least for maybe around 4 years of it coming into existence. And like I said earlier, the Central Pollution Control Board, CPCB, has put out some fantastic portal. So they have a portal online which has access to all the plastic produced by the brands, and also in terms of the plastics recovered. They actually have a portal. The portal also is able to trade credits, which is quite an interesting thing as well, which of course, it came about overnight, unfortunately, with a lot of technical glitches, but then they've been very proactive. And I really appreciate the government, the Ministry of Environment, MOEF, to have brought in something so quickly, and they're very responsive as well. So when I say it's been helpful, that's because it has prevented a lot of plastics from going into the landfills. Instead, it goes to cement factories where it's recovered as alternate fuel. So that's one benefit. And then later on, EPR covered all the perspectives of plastic packaging, including the high value, low value, etc. EPR does exist for other waste streams as well. It exists for e-waste, and also it's coming up for textile waste, which is the need of the hour. I mean, if anyone were to find out what are the big problems around waste management, just go to a landfill and see what's the majority of the waste streams you see. Currently, it is textile. Earlier, it used to be a lot of flexible packaging. Now it has reduced, but it's not reduced to that extent as expected, because there's not many recyclers for it. But you can see that EPR has started, bringing down some of the components in the landfills for sure. That's very obvious.
Thank you. That's good to hear. Before I go back to my other panelists, let me push on a little bit of the conversation we were having before going online, about there being a bit of a dissonance in the sector around how value can be extracted, that there is wealth from waste. Do you want to share your opinion on why that is why isn't there consensus on that?
Okay, let's take a bin at someone's house, right? You have inorganic waste, dry waste typically in that bin. And then in another bin, you have organic waste or the wet waste, kitchen waste. Now, for you to manage the kitchen waste effectively, you don't actually have an ROI on it, because the value for compost or biogas, which is the final product when you process the wet waste, is very low. So you can't compensate for the processing cost of wet waste. Now, if you take dry waste, in my opinion, it's around 40% of the dry waste is actually high value. Rest of the 60% is either medium or low value, and the low value can be even negative if we manage it in a responsible way. Now, this does not obviously consider any informalities in waste management, like burning the waste, dumping the waste, etc. So when you see net, including the domestic hazardous waste, it costs money to actually process waste. And it is like any other services industry, like housekeeping or facility management, etc. And that's one of the reasons why, we're firm believers that waste management costs money. It cannot generate wealth. But of course, when you look at it at scale, when you bring in technology, etc., there are opportunities to bring about some kind of business models to be able to optimize the cost. Now, even if you optimize the cost, it's very, very tricky for us to manage it responsibly, manage waste responsibly, have ethical practices in waste management where you're bringing in social justice to the supply chain, you're bringing in the social security benefits to everyone involved in it, and you're doing the right stuff. And if you're doing the right stuff, it becomes more of a cost. And this is one thought process that we have, and we've been trying to crack this piece for a very long time. Of course, going with automation, mechanization, technology, all of this would drive it in a positive direction, but it would still remain, in our opinion, a cost rather than a 100% revenue out of it.
Thank you. Viral, I think this is the right time for you to jump in and share your insights, maybe another perspective on the value extraction part of it.
Yeah. So again, right, the way that I see it, and from all the conversations that I've had with sort of different stakeholders in the value chain, right, waste can often exchange maybe 6 or 7 hands before it reaches the recycler, right? And each hand is trying to extract a little bit of value from when the waste sort of passes them, right? This starts with the folks that collect the waste from your house, then the transfer station that it goes to, and then the material recovery facility that it goes to, and then maybe to a broker, eventually finding its way to a recycler, right? If you were to compress a lot of the value additions within one place, one ecosystem, one organization, I think the math can work, right? And just because of the sheer scale of the problem, right? It would make a lot of business sense to do this commercially, right? And to be able to successfully extract wealth from waste, right? It of course cannot. I agree with Arun that with the current supply chain structure, it's almost close to impossible for any stakeholder in this complex value chain to be able to extract real wealth at scale. So yeah, I mean, that's my thought process.
Great. I think what I'm hearing is that there is value to be made, but there's so much fragmentation and informality that you need large amounts of technology and maybe a re-engineering of the value chain to actually extract value. I saw Rishabh nodding the hardest, so I'll go to him on this point and share what role does your technology play and how do you see that evolving in the Indian context?
So initially, when we had started, we had no idea that there is a concept of MRF present within the country, because most of the times we used to visit the landfill, and the MRF is a concept that is a decentralized way of doing the waste management, which has come up in the last couple of years, or at least in the tier 2 cities. In the tier 1 cities, it might have been for a longer time, but in the tier 2 cities, we have not seen that many MRFs come up, or the concept of decentralized waste come up. And so that is where, the idea was initially to, bring up a place where, the logistics has to be reduced. You cannot keep traveling with the waste from one point to another point and just keep transferring it and then finally bringing it to a point where, a recycler or any part of the value chain, exchanging value over the waste that is being, that they are taking away. But that's where we felt that, at some point, at some local level, we install an automation point where, the waste is being sorted. And that is where we keep increasing the value of the, waste that is being generated. But as already mentioned by all of them, that yes, if there are a number of people who keep, purchasing it from one another, then the final value that is to be extracted from the waste keeps decreasing. And that is where then it is very tough to involve technology, because technology brings in you require a lot of fixed cost, whenever you have to incur technology into a processing plant. And that is where, most of the MRFs or most of the waste management facilities fail to do it. So even we have that bottleneck yet to pass out. And we are also in that phase right now where we are deploying a technology. We're working with people who have already established or, compressed that value chain at some point of time by doing a lot of backward integration. But, for a lot of other companies, it is very tough to do that. So we are still figuring that out with them.
Right. Thank you.
Maybe I can just come in there quickly, Mudit.
Please.
Yeah, so I think, Mudit, you sort of hit the nail on the head with fragmentation. This is the biggest problem with waste management in India, and Viral mentioned that as well. So when you look at the entire supply chain, if you try and find solutions for one part of the supply chain, it just never works. And that's because of the lack of infrastructure, not just in India, but globally. And this is where, at our organization, we're trying to bring something different going forward, where technology will be used end to end in the supply chain for us to be able to leverage as much as possible to distribute the business models across the supply chain. This, in my opinion, is the key. Whether it is usage of technology, whether it's usage of automation and logistics and everything for that matter. I just wanted to add that one point.
Thank you. No, of course, I think that has become a crux of this entire challenge. But since we're talking of technology, Rishabh, let me come to you with a question that has come from the audience. This is a question from Siddharth, and this will probably be the most contentious issue as we bring more technology in. And he says that isn't using technology to sort waste much more expensive than employing labor in India? And how do you see this changing? I'm sure you can with this issue.
Yeah. So, I mean, we interact with recyclers and material recovery facility owners and managers on day-to-day basis. And it is not just, a part where they're talking about, the labor being cheap, but it also has to be thought about that how many labors can you keep training in a day? Because when we think about, laborers who are working on rack pickers or working in a field, open field or a closed MRF, wherever, it is not a job where and wherever we have gone that, they have a lot of shifts and a lot of people keep changing their jobs, and due to which the training cycle keeps increasing. And as Arun already mentioned, that the number of categories of waste are not just 15 anymore. We have increased that categories to 80, and the packaging industry is not standardized. You cannot keep changing and you cannot keep training people day on day basis. So there has to be a pattern that has to be recognized, and some sorting solutions will eventually come into place, and that will replicate it on scale, because what we use on day-to-day basis is once at some point of time when it becomes standardized, it is going to become a closed loop. And that is where the technology today is not mature enough that it will, cover the whole landscape. But there is a time frame in which it will cover that landscape from each point, from collection to the point where it is being recycled end of the day. So that traceability is definitely going to come into place. Not today, but yeah, that's what I can say.
Right. Thank you. I think if I can summarize the first part of that answer, that yes, maybe labor is cheap, but trained labor is not. And
Yeah.
that becomes the bottleneck to using labor for management. Viral, there's a very specific question for you. This is Preeti Jagwani asking that you were talking about exact problems that entrepreneurs should pick on in the waste sector. And one of them is fixing the supply chain. But what are the ways to do that? She suggests this idea of the reverse vending machines so that common people can return the waste for incentive. But do you want to talk about your experiences, your ideas, and how you've come to your insights? You're on mute, Viral.
Yeah, sorry. So, one part of that question, I think Arun beautifully answered at the start of his conversation, right? That it's impossible to be able to incentivize individual waste generators and make that commercially viable, right? Because the sheer quantum and value of it is not as high as we think it is, right? Waste only makes sense when it's aggregated for a large group of people, right? That's the first roadblock to imagining or extracting any value out of waste. It needs to be at scale, right? Now, looking at the supply chain and identifying opportunities, right? Like I mentioned, waste ends up changing multiple hands before it reaches a recycler and before it re-enters our economy, right? If you were to just track waste from your house, right? One single stream of waste and just go over the supply chain, you will come across a dozen problems, big or small, that you can solve for one of the multiple stakeholders that exist in the waste supply chain, right? As an entrepreneur, all that you need to do is solve that one problem at a time, and either then move up or move down the ladder, right? Depending on what your entry point of solving that problem is, right? Yeah, that would be my recommendation of thinking about solving a problem in this space.
Thank you. I'll take a question from Sangamitra Singupta myself, which was on what KPIs should be prioritized for effectively reporting on waste management. And maybe Arun, you can add to that answer. As a citizen of the country, as an urban resident, I say that I think the easiest KPI should be what fraction of the waste generated by households is going into landfills. And the North Star metric should be, can we minimize that? Can we go towards zero? It'll probably never be zero. There'll always be some inert materials, but that should be the metric we should be tracking as a society, as a country. In terms of EPR, what I do know, and maybe Arun, you can add to that answer, is that the EPR system does the beginning of that. It measures the waste or the material streams actually coming out of any factory or any company, and tracks that the factory is accountable for bringing an equivalent amount back into its value chain, right? Or at least be accountable for where it's going. So to me, those two things tie in together. What fraction of the waste generated either in households or in commercial enterprises are going to the landfill versus how much are factories, companies producing, which is being recovered in some way. So to me, that is the answer. Let me see if my panelists want to add something to that.
Yeah, absolutely, Mudit. These two are definitely linked up to each other. Basically, it's the concept of linear economy versus circular economy. Circular economy is possible, and linear economy is the waste to the landfill model, while the circular economy isn't. It's more about the resource recovery and how efficiently you can recover the resources as well. So that definitely is one of the key KPIs. And yes, of course, EPR has been able to quantify the various difficult plastics that come out into the industry and how they're able to recover on it by extending the responsibility of the producer. There are other KPIs as well, which are also equally important. One of the key aspects is in terms of the ethical approaches. So there are concepts called as responsible sourcing initiatives, which happens across industries. And this is coming into the space of plastics globally. We're part of the consortium of top brands, waste picker associations as well, and then recyclers, and what they call aggregators like ourselves. So we're more than an aggregator, but that's the term they've used. So basically, how responsible is the reverse supply chain is very, very critical. That should definitely be one of the key indicators to be added to it.
Thank you. I don't know if Rishabh or Viral have anything to add. If not, I'll move to the next question. Got a very interesting question, which is partly a question and partly a comment, and I'll again take the lead in answering that one, which is from Chetan Kumar, that there is value not just in streamlining the supply chain, but also creating value from waste. Absolutely, and that's the premise we started with. And I mean, I know you have a specific technology in mind, but the broader question is, how does a venture firm or investors generally assess the value in a company which is addressing some kind of a societal challenge, either waste management and so on? And here's my answer. So very often we tend to believe that the good intent of technology is enough to generate value. Whereas a technology to generate value for the society, for the founders, for the investors, it is required to have a solid business model which works for all the stakeholders. And we encourage at Blume, in my previous roles, I've been in incubators and in the government's innovation mission. We encourage the entrepreneur, the technologist, the scientist to iterate the business model to a point where it makes business sense. Only then is the technology viable at scale. Only then will it see wide scale adoption. One thing we've done very well is decentralize the idea of entrepreneurship in the country. So anybody who gets a good idea can start off, but to get it validated, to get it funded, to get it adopted by urban local bodies requires the technology or the company to also address the needs of all the various stakeholders in terms of either financial returns or in terms of management, which is aligned with existing systems. So that integration with both the technical and the financial systems is critical for technology scale up. So would love to engage further, Chetan, if you want. There are lots of incubators which help entrepreneurs fine-tune their business model, and you can work with one of them to see if there's something that can be improved in your specific offering. There is a question, Rishabh, following up on your previous answer, asking, I think this is from Megha Raha again, that how do you see waste workers being integrated into the technological system you're speaking about? So are we talking about upskilling? Are we talking about maybe training them to do better things? What is the evolution that you see?
Definitely upskilling is one way to go forward, because in which ways these machines will require operators to work towards it, keep them running for a longer period of times. Obviously, it will not be 1:1 conversion of number of rack pickers right now to with the automation pipeline, but that's what the future is any which ways. But it is going to be semi-automatic for a very long time, and then fully automatic. It's like the driverless cars. You're not going to get the driverless cars on the first day itself. There's going to be level 1 to level 5 kind of shifting that's going to happen, and it's not going to be an immediate effect kind of thing. So obviously, there is going to be a transition towards that. But that's all I can say.
Thank you. I think that's a wonderful answer. We've seen a lot of concerns around labor, but I am a strong believer that every new technology does improve the productivity of workers. And maybe this is one sector where the infusion of technology has taken the longest. So about time that we bring more applications, more types of technologies, and bring up all the workers who are in this value chain to a point where they have more dignified jobs, they have more stable and reliable jobs. And I do believe technology will have an overall positive role. The unfortunate part with all kinds of technological interventions is there's always the issue of worse before better. There is always that dip of things going a little bit worse as the reforms take place, as the reforms take hold, and then things improving. And the idea for any leader should be to manage that dip of worse before better. And it's not easy, but I'm very optimistic that all the entrepreneurs, all the stakeholders in this ecosystem are mindful of the large number of labor in this sector and how to improve their well-being in some way or the other. So overall, I think technology will help, but it does mean that we have to be mindful of all the implications of new technology infusion.
Just to add to what y'all have already pointed out, right? I feel the right way to look at it is, so let's say today, most material recovery facilities are manually operated, right? Which means folks are manually segregating. Let's hypothetically assume that in the next 10 years, we get to a world where our MRFs are completely mechanized, right, and completely automated. Um, yes, all of the workers that worked in these material recovery facilities earlier will be out of jobs, but they will now transition to jobs at maybe recycling centers, right? Where all of this recovered material will now go. So what's essentially going to happen with this shift in technology is jobs are going to change. They're not going to go away, right? And yeah, so that's essentially my way of looking at it.
Thanks, Virat. I think you've also preempted a question that we had coming in from Ecotech, and he was talking about how can we proceed to build technology-driven MRFs, and with the kinds of things that people like Rishabh are bringing in, which is more AI-driven, more image and vision-driven, there will be an improvement in the way material recovery happens at these centers. There will be a lot of adoption now. There are two questions I'm seeing around this entire story of urban local bodies. And the urban local bodies is something that I've dealt for a few years with in my previous role. So maybe if you allow me, I'll go into that. Of course, India's federal structure still leaves a lot to be desired on local management at the panchayat and the city management level. And if you think about barely 50 years ago, the amount of inorganic solid waste or plastic solid waste being generated was very little compared to the organic solid waste, right? And our urban local bodies have been slow in adopting to the change to the point where it is now a challenge of the magnitude that we talked about 65 million tons a year. But I'm also very hopeful that in the recent years, in the entire smart city mission and in the smart cities, see, there are structures to provide that flexibility. And I'm hopeful that those things will start showing results very soon. The urban local bodies face challenges of both resource and manpower or the right skilled technical resources. And those are issues of how the focal point of India's governance are the states. And the cities and the panchayats still haven't been given as much power as they should be. There's this famous line that people in the policy circles in India use, that everybody wants decentralization to themselves and no further. That please decentralize to me, I will not decentralize it further, right? And that is unfortunately the crux of the challenge in urban local bodies. But hopefully with the smart cities mission and now with the smart city SPVs really getting traction, I do expect a lot more solutions, a lot more adoption of technology in this entire space. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's definitely my perspective on how I see this evolution. I see a question from Karishma Kajaria, who I think is a student of MBA. There are other ways of monetizing waste beyond recycling and upcycling, and she's mentioning an example in Denmark where there's a model where waste to heat electricity could be another revenue stream for whatever can't be recycled. I think Arun did hint at that a little bit on the EPR story on how some plastics are getting used in the cement energy mix, but using solid waste for energy has been part of the solution. But maybe there are drawbacks to that. Arun, do you want to come back on that point? Maybe expound a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. The Denmark story had made waves. It did good and bad. It brought a lot of people into this sector because it was that hot a topic those days. It works very well in Denmark, probably, mainly because of the heating requirements for the households. So waste is burnt and then used for heating solutions. We know in India we don't need any more heating solutions, if at all, very small part of the year, and so certain geographies only. So when it comes to places like in Europe, even the high value waste is usually processed in this fashion. They hardly look at recycling. So while one could debate that this is some kind of a circular economy, it has its own disadvantages as well. The technologies in India haven't been up to the mark, to be frank. This is very debatable, but I think the proof of the pudding is how many of these waste to energy plants are out there. They're constantly being trying to be established, and many of them fail. Many of them don't even hit the newspapers. They don't even get spoken about. The ones that are operating very inefficiently and really haven't scaled up as well. They operate at much lower capacities. So I mean, it's a very simple fact that when traditional, methods of waste management work so well, why do we need to bring in advanced recycling methodologies? Of course, for those waste streams where you're not able to manage certain non-recyclables, this could be a better solution. But then India has quite a lot of cement factories which can take these waste streams. We would want to limit them to only those waste streams which are not recyclable, cannot be recovered. And that forms a very small portion, in our opinion, maybe just 10% of the waste. So again, in terms of logistics, cement factories are really far away from the urban parts of India. And that also poses quite a big issue. There are some guidelines, policy guidelines around this as well, but it's not been very effective. We know of a few waste to energy plants which have been operational in Delhi, for example, which haven't really lived up to the mark. So it isn't the best solution in our opinion. Waste to energy, it does not suit India, and a lot of other traditional waste management solutions work wonderfully well. It's just about scaling them up.
Right. And what about the climate impact around that? Is it considered eligible for carbon credits? Is it outside that system?
I have heard that the cement factories are able to recover carbon credits from it, which unfortunately, again, has not scaled up to the expectations that carbon credit markets had earlier. We have not been able to tap into it. We know of some companies at smaller scale who have been able to tap into it. There are, of course, other methodologies like voluntary plastic credits, which we have dug into. So that works pretty effectively. Again, not at scale, unfortunately. And there are some new concepts around plastic bonds, which have come out recently, which looks more promising. So there are a few instruments out there for revenue generation through recovery of plastics, but none of them have been able to scale up efficiently.
Thank you. There was an early question on the types of funds that are investing in this landscape and the reasonable returns. I think let me take that one. Nishant, just this morning, I think there was an announcement of a company of an investment in a company called Recycle. I can tell you there's a lot of interest in investing in things like crop residue-based products to reduce crop burning in North India. There are good investments coming up in sectors around hospital waste management and how do you make sure that they don't enter the solid waste stream. So there are lots of venture funds and other investors investing in this space. There are also some excellent founders starting off in this space, but the iron law of investments doesn't go away. That every rupee, every dollar is competing with other opportunities, right? There are some sources of either mission-oriented capital or impact capital, which will try and solve a problem. But in my personal opinion, and people on this call may agree or disagree, I think the best impact comes when there are tight business plans, tight business ideas, which can compete with the best of investments. And at least in India, whether it's things like energy, waste management, water management, I think all the best as agriculture to some extent, I think the best solutions have come out when startups have competed with all other opportunities in the market space. And not having impact investments, I think, is a superpower. To me, it brings a lot more capital discipline. It brings a lot more efficiency in the system across the structure of your company, across the people, the processes. So yes, lots of funds are investing. Yes, there are some impact funds, there are some mission-oriented funds, But I think the biggest impact will come when the entrepreneurs in this space compete with all other investment opportunities, whether it be real estate, whether it be e-commerce, whether it be electric vehicles, mobility, whatever. The best entrepreneurs will bring out business plans and models that compete with all other sectors, and that's where scale happens. That's where more capital flows in, and that's my belief on that. Let me see if anybody wants to add to that. Otherwise, I move to the next one. Okay, there was a interesting question that goes into the procurement story. I think Viral, you might want to go into that. That once there is some value to a waste stream, the procurement costs go up. We've seen this in biogas. I often talk about the three Indian biogas missions every decade, 80s, 90s, and 2010s. India had a biogas or a bio waste mission, and each of those failed because as the bio waste becomes valuable, the cost of the bio waste goes up and the cost of the procurement goes up, right? So that's a story that we've seen in that sector, um, which is not an easy one to solve. We've obviously not been able to solve it. But how do you see that problem affecting the solid waste sector? That once there is a value to the waste, then the cost goes up.
So when there is a value for waste, the cost will go up if the supply of that waste does not catch up with as much as the demand for that waste is growing, right? So to put things into perspective, right? PET bottles have been now getting recycled for the longest time, right? But over the last 5, 6 years, you've seen large recycling companies do a very, very good job at bringing back most of our PET bottles back into the circular economy, right? Now, as conversion technology for PET bottles has caught up, people have started to see value in that waste stream, and therefore PET bottles get picked out of the waste stream very, very easily, right? So as demand for a product as a raw material goes up, its value will inherently go up, right? What you need to do there is through business model innovation, find ways to access that material at a lower cost, which is through better segregation, through better education, and so on and so forth. And that is where that becomes a business opportunity, right? For you to be able to create more value. I don't know if that fully answered your question, but yeah.
No, but maybe I'll add to that as well, that a problem of plenty is not always a problem, right? It's usually a problem of management. And the plenty here being, of course, value for that. So if it becomes valuable, then people will start segregating more, there'll be more efficiency. So we do want to be at a point where people see it as productive for them to segregate early on. The entire story around bio waste or crop stubble burning has also been about time concentration, which will not be the case with solid waste because most of the solid waste is generated through consumption in urban areas or consumption in the modern economy. So even though I use the example of bio waste, the fact that it's not concentrated to 1 or 2 crops a year makes it easier to manage in this sector. Before I go to other questions, there's a question from Wahab on sustainable packaging materials like mycelium-based packaging and algae-based packaging. That also ties into Viral's answer that there'll be a lot of new material, new technologies that start coming up. There's going to be new innovation when there is value to a material waste. And just in the last 2 weeks, Blume announced investment in a company which is developing new kinds of packaging, secondary packaging for better composting, better recycling in a company called Bamboo. And that also goes back to the previous question of investments in the sector. There are investments coming up on a regular basis. We are looking at these opportunities very actively. And all of those opportunities get evaluated the best when they're competing with for the same dollars as any other sector. So wow, I hope that answers your question. There's a question from Preeti Jagwani on DRS in Goa. Peter, this is IPL season. DRS means decision review system. You should clarify what you mean here for DRS, unless Arun knows what Go adopted through
Yeah.
legislation.
Yeah, I can take that. So it means deposit refund scheme. It's a very well-known mechanism that has evolved from Europe. Deposit refund scheme works fantastically well for certain waste streams which have very low recovery rates because of poor logistics, collections, etc. And it has been proven that they can reach as much as 90+% of recovery over a period of 3 years, typically. So waste streams like Tetra Pak, the aseptic packaging have proven to work very well in the DRS system. And yes, you are right that Goa has made it a legislation. We're yet to wait and watch in terms of what's happening. We work in Goa quite extensively. Our founder is based out of Goa, and we have MRFs there. But unfortunately, our own opinion about the deposit refund system is it has got a bit complex in the sense that all packaging waste are to be considered. And that can actually mean quite a bit of a logistical nightmare. Just for everyone's understanding, um, when I was a kid, I used to go to the Kirana wala and pay a 2 rupee or a 5 rupee deposit for a glass bottle for a carbonated drink. And when I returned it, I get my deposit back. So that's the same system that we're talking about here. Just that it's more extensive and more complex in the way, in the mechanism it works. It kind of matches up with the responsibilities of a brand, not specifically EPR, but if a brand wants to make sure that the packaging is recovered, they would contribute to this kind of a model. We don't know. We really have to wait and watch. But of course, this can work extensively across India. It has been seen to work in specific pockets of ecosystems. For example, the Nilgiris Hills, the zoos in Karnataka. All of them would say, okay, you want to take this plastic bottle inside the zoo, pay a 10 rupee deposit. On your way back, you can get it back. So it does work with some waste streams. There is another startup which has operated this model in Kedarnath. Of course, with touristy locations, it works very well. So we're not being negative about it, but it's just got a bit complex in its first implementation in India, in Goa. We hope to see a lot of benefits coming out of it, learnings coming out of it, which can be implemented across. So for all the entrepreneurs out there, this is a very, very good model to consider. And like Viral said, if you look at the supply chain, there are at least a dozen problem statements you can think about. You can solve a fair chunk of it with concepts like DRS, which has worked globally, can work in India.
Thanks, Arun, and thanks for clarifying what DRS meant here. A related question, but on the e-commerce world, and I think Viral, I'll put you on the spot here, right? And this is from Nishant Gupta, that e-commerce uses lots of packaging material at times when the product is much smaller than the box pack. Why don't startups collaborate with such e-commerce companies to pick up the boxes and maybe get an incentive from the e-commerce industry? So your experience, you've been in this sector for quite a while. What would be the challenges? And actually, this is a issue that exercises a lot of us. We are young, we are parents of 2 young children, we order a lot of things online, and just breaks our heart to see the packaging. So why has this not worked yet? Why is reverse logistics not a big thing yet?
So when you look at packaging, right, number one, there is a lot of work happening on sustainable packaging, right? There's a lot of interesting work happening with just in general material sciences and how our packaging can become more sustainable. But also, as volume of these packaging material goes up, we're now starting to see a new wave of recyclers, right? So with a lot of the segregation centers and MRFs that I've gone to, I've started to see that people recognize that packaging material can be moved back to recyclers, and packaging material is starting to be looked at as a high value item and not as a low value item, right? So, yeah, we're I think at the start of that journey where our packaging in itself becomes more circular, more sustainable. Brands are also now, it is important for them, right, to be able to positively impact the environment while scaling and growing their business, right? One little issue or challenge that I do see is the fact that as packaging keeps evolving so rapidly, it becomes continually difficult to keep tracing what material gets used in what packaging, and therefore, create a supply chain where it can reach back a recycler, right? So just on a visit that I was on a couple of weeks back to a material recovery facility, I sort of realized that very often, even bottle and cap compositions can be different from brand to brand and from product to product, right? And that in itself is a big challenge. So the real opportunity from a governance standpoint, right, that I see is for the government to try and standardize some of this packaging, which will have a huge impact on how much of it is coming back to the circular economy and therefore getting recycled, right? And this is going to happen, right, sooner or later, through policy making. So that's a tailwind that me and a lot of people in the waste management ecosystem are hoping to catch in the next 3, 4, 5 years.
Right. No, I think I'm thinking of one other sector where private sector self-regulation has worked very well, which has been the entire internet space, right? All of the IP, there was very little government intervention at in that sector. But yes, you do probably need government intervention on the packaging side, and that's not something that we've done very well. Rishabh, let me bring you back on this point. You've worked with many of these facilities, and your technology probably is now or your technology centers are starting to see a larger share of e-waste from not e-waste, waste from e-commerce. So how have you seen that evolve? What do you think has been the technological answer to this?
I mean, as already Viral mentioned, that it has been moving on from plastics to a lot of paper-based product, or as you already mentioned, agro waste products are being utilized for making such packaging. For the now the air bubbles that used to be there, the plastic bubble wrap that used to be there has been replaced already with the paper. So all of those, that has been seen through our vision system. We have seen that change happen because we don't get them enough. Now. And yes, there has to be, as mentioned, that there has to be some standardization because we cannot keep always predicting with the part, like, let's say today Amazon is shipping on all of its bags that is LLDB, and if it ships to PP at some point of time, it will be really tough to identify that this is now shifted to PP. So that standardization is always required. But yes, it is going towards something that is sustainable end of the day, and we have to keep tracing it in end to end, like what is the material it is, what the material is, end of the day.
Thank you. I think I agree. I also see the direction is in the right, the direction you want it to be, which is people are thinking about less packaging. These days, if you see packages come from the likes of Amazon, sometimes it's just the product with a label on it. So they are also conscious, probably getting some pushback from customers. And same for the recovery as well. This actually ties in well with a question from Shubh on green tax and the green premium. So let me take that, Shubh. And the green tax or the carbon tax story has been discussed for the last 2 decades, at least in my memory. And then I believe that the green tax or the carbon premium or the carbon tax doesn't change behavior by the economic incentive as much as the information signal. The signal that this is important to the public, this is widely adopted by the public, this has been agreed or adopted by after a strong debate. And that is when that signal goes to the producers that it's time to start reducing your environmental footprint. And I think that has started working in the last few years. But the green premium itself is a very rare thing. In the previous session last week, we were talking about green hydrogen, and a similar question came up. And I strongly believe that green premium is the consumers will pay a green premium when there's a high operating cost, not a high capital cost. And people are willing to reduce the operating costs. It could be things like air conditioners or electric vehicles. But very rarely do consumers want to pay a green premium. And I don't see that changing, but I do see technologies evolving to reduce the green premium or reduce the additional cost required to go green in any sector. And I think that's the direction where a lot of other sectors are going, whether it is energy, whether it is resources, and so on. And so we are coming towards the end of the session. Last two questions. There's one on
Mudit, can I come in quickly on that?
and everybody else. Yeah.
Yeah. So, when it comes to waste management or any of the industry for that matter, what is true cost is yet to be really understood. When you look at life cycle assessment, etc., true cost is very important to be assessed. And then comes the topic about what is less or what is more. But talking about premiums for the sake of sustainability, etc., it could exist. But then there are good examples locally to India as well, where they're priced at the same as any other product. If you walk into a Decathlon store, you would see a lot of descriptions and posters around garments made from recycled fibers, and it's just not plastic, not the polyester only, but also with cotton fiber, which are all priced at the same as any other product. So it is possible, but then the only challenge is when you look at the true cost, it looks like a premium as well. So it's a catch-22 situation. Works sometimes, doesn't work sometimes, but it's very important to know that, with the responsible waste management practice, you're covering all the costs that is required, and then we can talk about premium or not. So that's just a feedback from me.
Right. Do either of you want to add in on this? Viral Abhishek? Okay, so there's also a question on the sustainability of these kinds of efforts without government support, and that ties into my previous point on that the best business models compete with the sectors or startups in other sectors. And while there are economic costs that are often not reflected in the financial cost of waste or the packaging, ultimately the real test of, and we're talking at Climate Startup Week, so this has to be a business focused conversation. Ultimately, the business has to stand on its own feet without government support. The urban local bodies in India are not the kinds to engage very extensively on in innovation. So we would encourage the startups to think about building business models that are economically viable, that are financially viable for the investors on their own, and not look at government support in this sector. If there are any discordant notes from my panelists, I'd welcome them, but I see them nodding, so I'm assuming we are on the same page. The last question, I think I'll leave it to the Climate Collective team, which is from Kunal, on how does one grow understanding of this space in general, startups, problem landscape, stakeholders. Kunal, there's a lot of material out there, both articulating the problem and suggesting solutions, whether it be from think tanks, whether it be from consulting agencies. There's a lot of material available publicly. I'm sure Arun's team at Sahas also has done some studies. There is a fair bit of insights to be learned when you're on the field. So like I've seen Viral do in the last few months, do find the time to take a tour of landfills or material recovery centers. I think you'll learn a lot more and a lot faster than from studying reports. But I'm sure the Climate Collective team can take this as a recommendation to share some studies and reports which can be useful. Let me see if my co-panelists have something to add to that. How to learn more about the sector.
I can start with it. I would just say, as already mentioned, visit the landfill, because that's one of the best ways to learn waste and to understand basically what all categories are there and how does one get processed end of the day. And the whole life cycle of things and the value chain of things can be easily understood from that point of view. If you just follow one of your waste collection vans to its endpoint, you'll understand how the journey of waste, how the journey of one bottle transforms, and how does it go from your house to a recycling center. So I mean that's one of the best ways I have learned, and I think it has been a long journey, long way, but that's the most rewarding way, I guess.
Completely agree. Yeah, I think it's about it's true. This is true for most parts of India. Much easier to learn being on the ground than anything on reports or data sets and everything. India needs to be lived, not read about. and applies equally to this sector as to others.
Just to add to that, we
Please.
all should be proud about the waste management policies in India, like I already mentioned. So I think going through the policies in detail can be quite eye-opening because some best practice are mentioned out there. There's obviously the question that if they are so good, why is it not being implemented? And that's the problem as well. But definitely with plastics, e-waste, and solid waste, it is definitely well, narrated, well put together. And also at a local level, there are bylaws, there are state government policies as well, which are very localized and provide good solutions for the context of the geographies as well. So that is also a good way to look at it.
Thank you. Actually, I wouldn't have thought of that. That's actually a very interesting point, that there's a lot to be learned from the policies. Arun, please feel free to share some examples. We can tweet it from our handle, or Climate Collective can tweet those or share those policies. And not normally a place I would have gone to study, but interesting that you think this is useful. But also, this is the startup week. This is a lot of people who have been on the implementation side or actually on the ground. And so if you use those policies, do go and talk to the people who are running some of these MRFs, who are at the landfills, and that will really complement your learning from these policies. Let me see if there are any other comments from my speakers. If not, I'll wrap it up very quickly.
Yeah, just one comment from me. It's quite amazing to see the quality of the questions that are put out by the audience. I am definitely quite impressed with so much of details, that have been put out. That gives us a lot of hope. And I started this conversation today saying we need a lot more people in here. We need a lot more collaborations in this space because there are too many challenges out there as it is. There's no point sort of working in silos. So basically, I'm saying a call for collaborations, partnerships is a must and it's a need of the hour. And there are a lot of benefits to be taken as well because the domain is quite large and there are lots of specializations involved. Not one person can solve the whole problem. And even if they do, not at the scale that is required. So that's my contribution. Thank you.
Thank you, Arun. I think you've shared a very interesting idea, the challenge and the opportunity. I'll ask my other panelists also to share one challenge and one opportunity that you see in the sector. Challenge can be something that other entrepreneurs think about, an opportunity which you might be thinking about. So one good thing that gives you hope, and one thing which maybe keeps you up at night. Rishabh, do you want to go first? Or?
Sure. So challenge is, again, as we have already mentioned during the discussion, that the value economics of how do we put technology at scale in this waste management ecosystem, and that is something we would love to face and understand more about. And as we grow, and while the opportunity for us is simple with the amount of waste that we're generating, I feel that it is a huge opportunity for us to create a value end of the day for everyone in this ecosystem, even down the chain wherever possible. So I feel that's where we stand.
Thank you.
Yes. One opportunity that I see is in material science innovation, right? Today, of all of the different streams of waste that are getting generated, there's still a lot of opportunity for you to identify streams of waste that are not coming back to our economy and are becoming a burden on our economy. If there is a way for you to creatively and through science find an application for those products and bring them back to our economy, that's a huge opportunity to go after, right? In terms of challenge and struggles, I would say business model innovation in this space is extremely challenging, right? For you to find a way to create a win-win situation where you are not thinking of waste management as a zero-sum game, right? You need to try and increase value of the entire pie instead of just taking a larger piece of the pie and leaving somebody else hungry, right? So that I think is the biggest challenge with the sector.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Viral, Rishabh, and Arun. And I see that Arun has just shared the links to the policies. This has been a very interesting conversation. I learned a lot and really impressed with the questions, as Arun said. I think the questions added a lot to our understanding as well. Would love to thank all of you and thank you, Climate Collective, for inviting Blume to partner on this. Let me hand it over to the Climate Collective team. Thank you, panelists.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. So we are at an end, and I would like to thank all of our attendees here. We hope that all of your questions have been answered and that you have a greater insight and clarity on the subject now. I would like to thank all our panelists here, Arun, Viral, and Rishabh, for simplifying and elaborating on this critical subject, providing their perspectives. And as usual, a very big thank you to Mudit for moderating it so smoothly. So there are several more sessions along the theme of climate tech that we have planned. And if you would like to know more, we have put the link in the chat box. Do also visit our website, climatestartupweek.com. Thank you so much once again to everyone who's present here, and have a great evening ahead.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. See you all.
Thank you. See you. Thank you.